All right, and we're going to stick with the oil story and energy prices. We got to get to Claudio Galimberti, the Senior Vice President of Analysis and Oil Markets at Rystad Energy. And Claudio, you were listening to Rick here. I got to ask you about this energy situation. Have we seen the lowest, maybe for a little bit of time, in gas prices and maybe crude oil as well?
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the very difficult question, commenting about the direction of prices. At least, probably, I can attempt to get to an answer there. In the very short term, at least, we see some key factors that are bullish on the oil price complex, and some factors that are clearly bearish. So, on the bearish side, we have to mention the risk of a recession in Europe, and the lockdowns in China and the real estate sector in China. So these are clearly concerning. There are concerning signs, although recently the ECB and also the major governments in Europe have made it clear that they will not allow easily, at least, the European economy to fall into a recession. So that should be supportive to some extent. On the bullish side, we have to mention the fact that we have yet to see what's going to happen to the Russian crude once the embargo sets in, which is supposed to be in the next few months. So starting in December, the embargo by Europeans of the Russian imports of crude. So I would say that if you're asking me about the oil prices, it's as usual extremely volatile. Probably in the past few days, we have seen more bullish sign than bearish, because the bearish sign have been priced in. As far as the gasoline prices, this adds another layer of complexity, because then you need to consider what's happening to the refining side of things. But all in all, I would say that probably we have seen the bottom of the market for the time being. Also consider that OPEC and OPEC Plus will not allow the prices to, or will not try, at least attempt to sustain the prices if they fall below a certain threshold.
Well, and let's stick with OPEC Plus and maybe reduce the complexity of this next question here. We saw OPEC Plus try to limit the amount of barrels that were increased or that are going to be pumped for the month. I'm not getting my words straight, but the net effect is that they have already not been living up to their quotas. I've seen deficits ranging from estimates of 2 million, 2.5, 2.7 million barrels per day. Does OPEC Plus really have the spare capacity if it were needed to enter the market again?
Excellent question. This indeed reduces the whole complexity to one key number, which we always have to bear in mind, which is what is the spare capacity in OPEC? And the effective spare capacity, and we deal with this at Rystad in a very detailed bottom-up way, we know it's not that much. So if you take into consideration Saudi Arabia, UAE, and part of Iraq, we can get to close to 3 billion barrels per day. And that would be the capacity that could be deployed within the next, let's say, 60 days, 30 to 60 days. So you still have a lag there. Now, is that enough? Now we enter the realm of complexity in the sense that it very much depends on the size of the outage elsewhere. So Russia can, in fact, go through a severe downgrade of its production starting next year. And if that is the case, the key question is, can OPEC, Saudi Arabia, United Emirates, Iraq in particular, fill the gap? It might be the case that they can't, right? And or also it may be very well the case that they don't want to, because that would sustain the prices. As far as the difference between, you asked me initially, the difference between the pledges of OPEC Plus and the actual production, according to our detailed estimates, is actually 3 million barrels per day right now. So they are not fulfilling their pledges, which is also a signal that in part they can't, and in part they don't want to. So that's also a clear signal coming from them.
And I also wanted to ask you about the SPR. That's a strategic petroleum reserve, somewhat controversial in the U.S., not designed for and not supposed to be deployed for political purposes, but it always ends up in the political realm. Nevertheless, this was an idea, by my recollection, initiated maybe 2 decades ago when the U.S. was not pumping shale, when the U.S. was not energy dependent. I'm wondering how important is the SPR to United States energy dependence going forward, regardless of whether it's 60% full or 100% full?
Another excellent question, I have to say. So the Strategic Petroleum Reserve were actually implemented the first time 50 years ago. And this was the time when the United States was heavily dependent on oil imports, and it became even more so in the early 2000s, right? So this is when the United States was importing 10 million barrels per day, even more. Right now, we're importing much less because we have, specifically on a net import basis, we have the Permian, the big Permian production, U.S. shale oil. So how important are they in dealing with supply? Let's call them supply dislocation. I would say that they are very important in the case for instance, you have a hurricane. A hurricane comes through the U.S. Gulf Coast. It knocks off temporarily some production facility. This is a good use, in my view, of the SPR because you have a temporary supply outage. How about using it to tame the prices? That's a little bit more complicated because, if you're trying to address a structural problem with SPR, then you are at a loss. And the reason for that, the SPR are not unlimited. So we started the SPR at the beginning of the year with 600 million barrels in Strategic Petroleum Reserve of crude. Right now, after what Rick said earlier, right now we're down to 440, 430. So they are not unlimited. Before long, you will need to stop releasing the SPR, and this is going to happen in the next couple of months, and then start refilling it. So if I think of what is the SPR equivalent in terms of demand right now, we're down to 20 days. So it's concerning, right? So if we have a major disruption, then our SPR will not last for many weeks. So the use of SPR in a nutshell, if we are addressing a temporary supply outage, then yes. If we're addressing a structural shift in the market, then no. Yep. So I would say that what they did at the beginning in April was probably very good. So was a correct use of SPR because right now, back then, we didn't have a strong U.S. production, but right now we do. Well, so the Permian is growing fast.
And we appreciate your time here. Claudio Galimberti, Senior Vice President of Analysis, Oil Markets at Rystad Energy.